everything I know about MBTI, which really, what I mean by that is everything I know about hexadecimal typology, that which works with 16 types, myers-briggs system, and Socionics. Firstly, I like seeing the entire system as one system, so everything lining up perfectly between MBTI and Socionics. I think that the best understanding of these 16 types is the way to go forward with it. So when people say they're INFJ in Myers-Briggs and LSE in Socionics or some weird thing like that, that doesn't make sense to me in the way I use the theory and these constructs and everything. By the way, I don't think this is going to be a brief video. And I'm probably not going to be doing a lot of editing. That's the basis of what I know, or that's the basis of how I use the system. I know it's a very good system, and there's definitely a reality tunnel I can get into where the types and the cognitive functions really are true. And I see the socionic relational correspondences between the types as also being true. And there is something that I still hold as a very romanticized ideal vision in my head, where the 16 types really can all supervise each other. So I guess from an implementation standpoint, a top-down standpoint, this could be something that would be instituted, and maybe it would be beneficial, or maybe it would be an absolute hell zone if it were implemented. Before the implementation, which I see as a TE thing, there's an underlying wire thing, which I see as a TI thing. So types as TI. And I mean, that's largely what the typological community is typology as TI. I very quickly jumped to typology as TE because it's more of like an implementation of these things, or like what happens when these things are actually implemented. Because if you talk about something TI for long enough, there does become a natural TE implementation that probably is going to start happening. And also with quadra movements, TI is translated to TE probably between beta and gamma quadras, if the movement is working that way, or if you're looking at things from that sort of movement, downward movement, top-down movement. Yeah, so, and I think that there are two different typologies in my head, the TI typology and TE typology, and this doesn't necessarily mean the way that TI users use typology and the way that TE users, I should say TI valuers and TE valuers, use the theory, although there's also some correlation there. I see a TI as the actual theory underlying that's already there, that's naturally there, and that can be discovered as the true order of the universe, that there is actually wires in the universe that we live in that we can find that seem to resemble something like the typology we understand hexadecimally in 16 types in a Myers-Briggs or Socionic format. But then there's also what I see as the TE side of typology, which is the social role. And that probably also has to do something with role function, which can be any cognitive function, depending on your type, theoretically. But I do see, it gets to a point, especially with appearances and stuff, and maybe it's not even a TE thing, maybe it's an FE status thing too. It's very hard for me to see. Like there's then maybe it's not a TE thing so much as a TIFE thing. Whereas there's the wires underneath of what's actually going on, and then there's what you're considered in a group, and it becomes a social, like you can socially become an INFP in one group and socially become an INTJ in another group, where underneath you might be a different type entirely. And like for all intents and purposes, in certain groups you can be one type or another. One reason I bring this up is because this is something that I experience, and different people will type me different things, and if I'm agreeable to that, which agreeability suggests that I would be on the feeler end of the spectrum, if you think in spectrums, or I'm typologically a feeler, which most of the time I would say that's true. But there are plenty of people who don't type me that way, and I guess maybe it's part of the experiment to agree with people's typology of you. So to some people I'm an INTJ, and to some people I'm an INFJ, to some people I'm an INFP, to some people I'm an INTP, and to some people I'm an ENTP. And those are the ones that have come up recently. I mean, those are the ones that have come up in the past. So I guess part of it is like I'd like to put aside the whole identity part of it, like what type I am, because that becomes an identity crisis that doesn't really have a solution. But at the same time, what I'm becoming very conscious of is the whole social role part. And maybe I am an advantagist in that sense, or an opportunist, or a pragmatist, in that if people see me certain ways, not for the entirety of my life, but if people see me certain ways in certain situations or in certain social groups, and there are myriad social groups in my life, if people see me as one type, I can accept that, and for all intents and purposes, in that group, I am that type to them. So if it's a group that is typologically or socionically aware, then I might be one type. And if it's not a group that's aware, I might get or they don't use typological language, I might get a feel for what sort of type they're expecting me to be. Sometimes you can see, if it's with a specific individual, they might project onto their duality, or they might be projecting onto their environment that they need that duality. And if you're the only one there, and you're sensitive to picking up expectations, then you might feel that you're expected to be that type, and what you know about that type, or how to be that type of person, whether you're looking at hexadecimal typology or not, then you in a certain sense might be able to become that type. And then maybe it's like acting. I'm tempted to go into what functions might be actors, but every function and every type acts. And they're all part of the scene. You know, there's certain, I guess, probably, especially early on in studying typology, because of the stereotypes, certain fields can get stereotyped. And then you can look at a field and see a bunch of people in a group and go, oh, that's just a bunch of INFPs. It's just 30 INFPs who get together. Or we look over here and that's just a bunch of ESTPs and ESFPs. And that's all it is. It's a group of 30 of them, but it's like that's never the case. And I don't even know, I really don't know what happens if you get a bunch of people together in one group. Because even if you've got, like, let's say, an INFJ Facebook group where everyone identifies as an INFJ, there still has to be a breakdown from there, so that if there's 16 people, there might be a new Socion formed within INFJ, and who knows if anyone's, how many of them are INFJ to begin with, even if they self-type as that. It's unlikely that it's all of them. If, with any type, ESTP, you can see it's sort of off topic. There's like a new Socion that can form. And in this way I see it as the social effect. So like, okay, the TI wires, theoretically, if you've got a group of 16 people who all type as the same type, the same 4-letter type within Myers-Briggs, or the same 3-letter type within Socionics, bring them all together, a new Socion will probably form. And the simplest understanding of this, and you know, it's not something that's going to directly manifest as this, but you could see 16 types of the same type form into subtypes. So say if you've got 16 INFJs in a group together, online or in real life or something, there's got to be, just naturally, to get shit done or to do anything, one person has to be like the INFJ, and then there's probably someone who becomes the ISTJ, and the INFP, and the ESTP. There might be the ESTP INFJ, or maybe the INFJ is really the ESTP INFJ because they would be like the most dualized and therefore probably the one most likely to lead. And I'm thinking about the concept of an INFJ retreat, and there's one of those being scheduled right now. It's like, okay, if everybody shows up there, and it's a kind of odd to me because it's an introverted group doing this. I suppose that it's a retreat maybe doesn't surprise me as much for introverts. It's not like a basketball game or something. But yeah, there's got to be like a new Socion that forms. And then it's like, well, once you have a situation like that, we understand each other based on contrasts. And we're all embodied differently. So there's got to be like new Socions forming all the time. And this is probably one of the main things that gives me a nuanced view of typology and socionics. I tend to think in groups or environments, which is probably why I'm drawn to socionics in the first place. But there is a change that happens in the social role, at least, where you have native typologies of people that as individuals might identify and have the wiring of one type or another, but then you put them into a new situation, the social role has to change things. There might be there might be something here that's in the territory of Enneagram 9, or the mental territory of Enneagram 9, or the spiritual territory of Enneagram 9, which is a changeability to fill in the gaps of social groups. Also, Life Path 9, if you read descriptions of this or get into it a little bit further, there's something similar. I don't know if Enneagram 9 and Life Path 9, I don't know how many people have understandings of the connections between these two things. But there is, having a 9 system, just as typology is a 16 system, Enneagram is a 9 system, and the 9 represents wholeness and all the other things in one. Everything in one, not necessarily all at the same time. 9 is the crown of the Enneagram, and in 9th understanding, there's a submission to the group's will in a certain way. But also the 9 has already collected understanding or being of the other 8 types or life paths. That there's a changeability depending on the situation. So there are all sorts of adjustments, and there's certainly adjustments that can happen within typology that are easy enough to explain as, well, this is a 3rd slot FE person doing this, and there's tons of situations where that seems good enough, or this is a 2nd slot FE person, FE tool function, a creative function, they do it in this way, and they're doing this to create this sort of emotional contagion or this sort of emotional effect that will put this person doing this thing in this direction. Or, FE Dom. I think of like adjusting and changeability, mirroring and stuff has a lot to do with FE. However, what I'm referring to, I don't know if it can be mapped as a specific function or as a specific function, and maybe it can, and I'm just blind to seeing what that is. But it seems to be something that happens with everyone. And it might even be hierarchical, which seems like more of a TE thing. So if you come into a system, you're way at the bottom, like, there's certain things the hierarchy expects of you. And there are also typological differences between societies and which personalities are valued. So there is something about INFJ that's important in the West, and maybe in Christian countries for one, because Christ is considered INFJ. So there's something in that, and for me, I've experienced there is an ideal nature about that type, not just because that type is an idealist and is often like seen as a good person, but there's a deification of the type because we already have in Western mythology, and by mythology I don't mean fake shit, I mean the Western narrative, the Western tradition. I don't really denigrate anything about something being a narrative or a mythology, because I've seen the depths of what that means and how stories end up being more true than specific events. Anyway, if there is a type that like is venerated and deified to that extent, there's going to be like a natural movement towards that. Maybe in like self-awareness circles, or when you get close to spiritual circles or something. Circles where higher knowledge, higher understanding, meta understanding is valued, and I becomes the king. So you would think that quite obviously INFJs and INTJs there would be the most venerated types. You would aspire to be one, and then it becomes a social role. It's like becoming a master. It becomes a hierarchical thing. You got to do certain things in order to be seen as this type, when really that's not the TI purpose of typology, but it's always running alongside of it. Even in TI valuers, it has to be taken into account. So that definitely does something to my understanding of type all the time, and my understanding of identity.